Manager forces me to get a doctor's note despite it being illegal to do so. Doctor writes him the most passive-aggressive note, signing me off for 2 weeks instead of 2 days to teach him a lesson. I posted this, but it got removed, and I think it was maybe because I didn't make the malicious compliance clear enough. So I'm going to try again and make it extra clear. When I was in my early 20s, I worked at a supermarket. I should note that I was a pretty reliable employee. I was never late. In fact, I often got in early, and I rarely called in sick. At the time this happened, I had not called in sick for 9 months, and even then, the manager had sent me home. I had been up all night, swinging between burning hot and freezing cold, so I was obviously feverish, and I had been throwing up at both ends, shall we say. At one point at about 2 a.m., I was on the toilet, with my head in the sink, utterly miserable. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, I was lifting my head off the sink, and it was 7 a.m. I was due to start work at 12 that day, but that obviously wasn't going to happen. So I called up the manager. Let's call the manager Steve. Steve was known for being a real a-hole. He never believed anyone who called in sick except his best buds, usually other managers, never lowly staff, but often called in sick himself. A lot of the time we knew it was because he was hungover and not actually sick. The conversation went as follows. Me, "Hey Steve, sorry, I can't come in. I'm sick." Steve, "With what?" Me, "I don't know. I think it might be the flu. I've been up all night being sick, and I have a fever." Steve, "Don't be stupid. If you had the flu, you'd be completely knocked out. I need you in. Come in or you're fired." Me, "I can't. I just told you I can't stop vomiting. I passed out." Steve, growling angrily, "Either come in or bring a doctor's note, or you're fired." In the UK, you are legally allowed to self-certify for 5 days. This means you can tell your employer you are sick and you do not need a doctor's note. If you're sick for more than 5 days, you then need a note. It is also illegal to demand a doctor's note during the self-certify period. I knew this, but I was terrified. This was during the recession. I couldn't afford to lose my job, so I got myself dressed. Almost passed out trying to do so. Then trudged to the doctor's some 25 minutes walk away. I end up sitting in the doctor's office for a little over an hour, which for walk-in was pretty good. I get in to see the doctor, and she is furious at me for coming in. You're not supposed to come to the doctor's when you have a cold or flu, and of course I knew I should be able to self-certify. She told me as such, saying I shouldn't be here and should have stayed at home. I then explained what had happened with Steve and how he had threatened to fire me over this, and I couldn't afford to lose my job. I was struggling as it was. My doctor turned her anger towards my manager. She asked if I got sick pay from the company, and I said yes. "He wants a sick note, does he?" the doctor says. "Okay, I'll give him a sick note." Now, my manager just wanted a note confirming I was sick, but instead my doctor wrote something along the lines of this. Backslash has come to the surgery because Backslash has insisted she come in spite of the fact that this is illegal and all employees are allowed to self-certify. Due to being forced to make this unnecessary and highly dangerous trip when the patient is ill, has a fever of 39°C, and almost passed out in the waiting room, I am signing Backslash off for 2 full weeks to recover. Had Backslash been allowed to self-certify as is the law, they might only have needed a few days, but due to straining themselves, they now require 2 full weeks. They are not to be permitted to work until Backslash. The doctor said she would have signed me off longer, but this was the longest she could do without requiring further evidence. So basically, instead of just being off for a few days, I was now signed off for a full 2 weeks, and I'd be paid for it. I went to my place of work, at which point one of the duty managers saw me and asked me what the heck I was doing here. Go home. I was obviously very unwell. I explained what happened. They agreed to help me downstairs to Steve's office and went with me inside. I handed Steve the note. He looked worried and tried to say, "I wasn't being serious about firing you." Well, gee, when you angrily growled it down the phone, it sure sounded like it. The duty manager then declared that they were going to drive me home. It was clear Steve wanted to argue, but had the sense to know he shouldn't. The duty manager then drove me home, made sure I was okay, then went back to work where they informed our union rep of what had happened. Steve had a disciplinary hearing where he was given a severe reprimand and a warning. Steve tried to argue he never said I'd be fired and I was lying and just decided to go to the doctors. But the duty manager said they heard him admit to it when he said to me that he really didn't mean it. I felt better after a few days and enjoyed my 2 weeks off, fully paid, and enjoyed the nice weather we had. Meanwhile, Steve was forced to work overtime because we were short-staffed. So thanks to the doctor, instead of being off for a few days, I ended up getting a nice 2-week paid vacation, and Steve was given a final warning, all because he insisted I get a doctor's note. TLDR. Manager demands I get a doctor's note or I'm fired. So the doctor signs me off sick for 2 weeks instead of 2 days to teach him a lesson. Edit. To clarify the whole, you're not supposed to come in when you are ill. I should have been more specific. The rule is you're not supposed to come in when you have a cold or flu. The reason is there's nothing a doctor can really do except recommend you take over-the-counter cold and flu meds. So it is recommended that you do not come in if you have a cold or flu, and instead take meds at home or pick some up at the pharmacy instead of risking infecting those waiting in the surgery. Even then, it's not a hardcore rule, more a common courtesy asked of people. If you really want to, you absolutely can. My boss loves to call me at 6:15 a.m. to ask me if I would like to fill the shifts of the people who just called in sick. This is an everyday thing. I was bored and frustrated, so I decided to volunteer at 3:30 a.m. to call this same manager to ask if they needed extra help. He got super pissed and tried to write me up for it. I showed the GM the timestamps of the calls I had received. I don't get calls anymore. You can't continue working from home because you go idle and chat too often. As part of the plan to return to office post-COVID, my company has done a lot of redesignating of who can permanently work from home, who can hybrid, etc. I really wanted to work from home full-time. I hate the office with a burning passion. It's distracting, it's a long commute, there's no benefit to being there, so on and so forth. I'd just rather be at home. Well, when we thought May was going to go back to office time, they started giving out the new designations. I got designated as an office full-time. It made no sense to me. I work on a team of 8 people, and each of us is in a different office somewhere in the country. I've literally never been to an in-person meeting or needed to do in-person work in 3 years at this company. Every single other person on my team got designated to work from home. So I brought it up with my boss and asked to work from home. When I started at this company and lived elsewhere, I got to work from home for 4 months before I moved, and the past 14 months during COVID have been at home. So 1836 months at the company have been WFH. What I was told is that I go idle too often and chat to trust to work from home. Basically, we have a company-wide IM system that shows you as available, idle, or in a meeting. If you don't touch your keyboard for 5 minutes, you show as idle. So they've decided to use this as a measure for who is working and who isn't. The thing is, like many people in many types of jobs, I don't have crap to do for a full 8 hours every single day. The amount of work I have to do on a typical day takes 3 to 5 hours of actual attention. There simply isn't something to do all the time. My performance numbers actually went up working from home. By all objective KPI numbers, I'm a better worker at home. In fact, in the KPIs that I don't flat out lead the team in, I come in second. There isn't work to do that I'm neglecting or procrastinating. When something comes up, I simply do it until it's done, or until I can't do anymore due to waiting on someone else, then stop. And I've done that method long enough that my work queue stays empty because I work to get my queue down to the point where when something comes up, I can immediately address it and be done with it. But because I have other ways to spend my time in downtime instead of messing around online at my cube, pretending to be working, meaning I show idle more often, I'm a worse worker apparently. I was told if it weren't for that, they would let me work at home. So I wrote a 6-line PowerShell script that virtually inputs the period key every 4 minutes that starts running every day at 8 a.m. and stops at 5 p.m. So now I literally never go idle. I do the same amount of work and still read books, watch TV, and play video games on the side. But I have a shiny green check next to my name all day. Because of COVID complications, they eventually said no going back until after Labor Day. I just had a meeting with my boss, and he said over this time they've noticed I go idle a lot less than I used to, so they're changing my designation to work from home, all because of a little icon in some software. This concludes my TED Talk on why low to middle-level managers are the dumbest, most useless do-nothing positions in all of corporate America. Edit. I do not need to be told to buy a mouse jiggler for the 30th time. I'm aware of what they are. This cost me no money and achieves the same thing. Why would I pay to achieve an effect I've already achieved for free? Edit 2. A lot of people are understandably asking for the script. Dummy shell equals new object, com, with script. Shell, dummy shell, send keys, dot. That's the backbone of the whole thing. There's different ways to implement it with for loops or schedule tasks or whatever. That part's up to you. But that's all the PowerShell needs at its core to accomplish this. A lot of people have pointed out that sending insert or F13 instead of period would be better, so change that up if you want. To all the people commenting that I'm a shitty employee and obviously trying to insult me over it, I wish I could make you feel just how little I care. To all the people implying a work day isn't valid if you aren't at 100% capacity from 8 to 5, keep it up, you truly are an ideal employee. To them, enjoy the taste of leather, bootlickers. Edit 3. Some of why all would be pissed as fudge if I explained the concept of firefighters to you. Take off my earphones while you're speaking to me? Sure, no problem, officer. Happened this morning. Even though I made a complete and full stop at a four-way stop, I get pulled over by a police vehicle, lights flashing, the works. I turn my dash cam around to face me and whomever goes in front of the driver's side window. I roll it down and ask, "What seems to be the problem, officer?" Officer looks at me the way one would look at a sticky piece of gum stuck to the bottom of one's shoe. "You didn't make a complete stop," he says. "I adjust one of my hearing aids, lost part of my hearing due to being a touring session musician previously, and before I could speak, he firmly orders, 'Sir, take off your earphones when I'm talking to you.' I take both hearing aids off and look at him. I can read lips a little, but we're both masked, so I can't understand what he's saying. I communicate in sign language simultaneously while speaking verbally. I'm deaf and I didn't understand what you just said. Can you communicate to me in ASL, American Sign Language, please?" He points at my hearing aids that look like Apple AirPods, motioning me to put them on. I respond, "Yes, officer. Without those, I can only communicate in ASL. Please instruct me in ASL, and I will be compliant in every possible way." He looks at the dash cam that's neatly pointed squarely at us and mumbles, "For fudge's sake." He then motions for me to go, giving me 2 thumbs up. Needless to say, I rolled up the window and drove away as fast as legally allowed. Couldn't wipe the smile off my face all day, lol. Addendum. Whoa. 13K likes in a span of less than 2.5 hours. Thanks all. Don't worry, I'll update with a YouTube link as soon as I and a more gadget-savvy nephew extract the footage. I will not be driving the car to preserve the video and to not risk getting it recorded over. Cheers. My neighbors wanted to call a professional to mark their property line. My parents agreed. This was a long time ago, but I remember it clearly. We moved into a community with tight space in between our house and our neighbors, and we didn't like them being able to see into our kitchen. We put up a bunch of plants, costing thousands, but my parents thought it would be worth it. A week later, my parents awoke to the plants completely chopped down. My father was furious and marched down to our neighbor's house. He told my father the plants were on his property line. Therefore, he had total right to take them down. He warned that if anything were to go on his property again, he would report us to the authorities immediately. Later that day, my father called the company that put in the plants, and with the warranty, we could have them replanted next week for no charge. We made sure there was no way it was on our neighbor's property. However, a few days later, we caught him chopping them down at 2 a.m. We called the police upon obstruction of property, and after a chat with my neighbor, he decided to call a professional and mark his property line. My father agreed. A few days later, I got home to find orange tape in my neighbor's yard. Apparently, his fence was 11 feet over our property line. We watched as he took down his fence, completely furious. Within the next month, we were enjoying our new space and privacy in our backyard, and my neighbor ended up losing 1/4 of his backyard. My neighbor ended up having to pay almost $10K for the destruction of our property, and we got to plant our plants again. TLDR, my neighbor chopped down our plants because he claimed we were on his property. After calling a professional, he lost 11 feet of his backyard and had to pay for destruction of property, and we got to keep our plants.